You are being manipulated right now by people you trust in ways you cannot see, not dramatically, not in the obvious manner that would have alerted your defenses. The actual manipulation operating in your life is quieter, more sophisticated, and far more effective than the kind you have been trained to recognize. It does not announce itself. It does not feel like manipulation. It feels like the natural unfolding of relationships, opportunities, and conversations that happen to produce specific outcomes. Outcomes that consistently benefit other people more than they benefit you. This is not paranoia. This is precision. Machiavelli understood that the most effective manipulation is the kind the target never identifies as manipulation. The crude operator gets caught because his operations are visible. The skilled operator never gets caught because his operations look identical to ordinary human behavior. They blend into the background of normal life. They produce their results invisibly, and the target experiences the outcomes as luck, fate, or his own decisions, when they were always the product of someone else's careful work. What follows are 9 Machiavelli reasons most men are easy to manipulate without knowing it. Each of them describes a specific exploitable opening you have been broadcasting your entire adult life. Each of them is being used against you right now by people who recognize it more clearly than you do. And each of them will continue producing the same outcomes for as long as you remain unaware of what you are giving away. Reason number 1. Your need for approval is a control panel anyone can press. Every time you visibly seek validation from someone, you hand them a specific lever. They now know that withholding approval will produce a behavioral change in you. That granting approval will reward whatever you just did. That conditional praise can shape your future actions in any direction they choose. You have given them operational control over your behavior without recognizing the transfer occurred. Machiavelli understood this dynamic with surgical precision. He observed that men who openly desire approval announce their vulnerability to anyone capable of providing or withholding it. The operator does not need to threaten or coerce. He simply needs to control the supply of approval. The approval-seeking man will then modify himself in whatever direction maintains the supply, without realizing he is being modified at all. You have been pressing your own control panel buttons in front of people your entire adult life. The slight adjustments to your opinions in the presence of certain individuals, the specific way your voice changes when speaking to people whose regard you value, the micro shifts in your behavior, calibrated to maintain favorable reception. All of this is operational data. People who watch carefully accumulate it, and people who understand what to do with it deploy it accordingly. The men in your life who have been most effective at moving you toward outcomes they wanted have not used force. They have used your own approval-seeking patterns against you. The moves were so subtle, you experienced them as your own choices. The choices were yours. The architecture that produced them was theirs. Reason number 2. Your inability to disappoint anyone makes you maximally exploitable. The man who cannot bring himself to disappoint people is the man who can be steered toward any outcome that requires him to fulfill expectations. His incapacity to deliver bad news, refuse requests, or hold positions that produce displeasure means his behavior can be predicted with high accuracy. Manipulators do not need to convince him. They need only present him with situations where the path of least disappointment leads to the outcome they want. Schopenhauer observed this pattern as one of the most reliable in human relationships. The man who avoids disappointment is operating on a single decision rule: minimize the negative reactions of others. Anyone who understands this rule can exploit it consistently. They simply need to construct situations where complying with their wishes is the path that avoids the most disappointment. The man will then walk that path while believing he is making free choices. You have been walked down many such paths. The favors you provided that you did not want to provide. The commitments you accepted that did not serve your interests. The positions you held that ran against your actual preferences. Each of these involved someone who recognized your specific allergy to disappointing others and constructed the scenario around that allergy. You did not feel manipulated because the manipulation operated through your own values rather than against them. This is the most effective form of manipulation, the kind that uses the target's own psychology as the operating system. Machiavelli would have recognized the technique immediately. The targets never do. Reason number 3. Your visible emotional reactions are a real-time map of your vulnerabilities. Every time you display strong emotion in front of others, visible anger, evident frustration, obvious hurt, transparent desperation, you provide them with diagnostic information about your internal architecture. They learn what triggers you, what wounds you, what destabilizes you, what desperation looks like in your specific case. This information is not forgotten, it is filed, and when relevant, it is deployed. Machiavelli wrote about this with characteristic clarity in his observations on emotional sovereignty. The man who reveals his emotions reveals his pressure points. The pressure points become tools in the hands of anyone willing to use them. The willingness to use them is more common than the man assumes, because most operators do not recognize their own deployment of these tools as manipulation. It feels to them like simply navigating the relationship effectively. You have provided detailed maps of your vulnerabilities to many people across your life. Some of these maps are still active. They are being referenced by people whose interests are not aligned with yours when interactions become difficult. The specific pressure they apply when they want a particular outcome from you is not random. It is calibrated to the diagnostic information you provided them years ago. They are using your old emotional displays as their current operating manual. This is one of the reasons certain people in your life seem to know exactly which buttons to press. They are not psychic. They have access to the information you broadcast openly. The Stoics understood emotional sovereignty for this exact reason, not because emotions are bad, but because their public display creates exploitable openings that the disciplined man does not provide. Reason number 4. Your stated values become the leverage points for those who do not share them. When you make your values public, you give the people around you specific tools for compelling your behavior. The man who openly values loyalty can be moved through invocations of loyalty. The man who openly values honesty can be steered through framings that present compliance as the honest path. The man who openly values consistency can be locked into commitments by reminders of his prior positions. Each stated value is a potential leverage point in the hands of anyone willing to use it. Machiavelli understood that values are dual-use information. They guide the holder's behavior. They also signal to others how the holder can be moved. The operator does not need to share the value to weaponize it. He needs only to recognize it and frame his requests in terms that activate it. The target then complies, not because he was coerced, but because compliance is consistent with his own stated values. You have been moved by this technique many times. The requests that were framed in terms you could not refuse without contradicting your own stated principles. The positions you held that were used against you when circumstances changed. The consistency you have publicly performed that locked you into outcomes that no longer served you. Each of these was the predictable consequence of broadcasting your values to people who did not share them, but understood how to use them. The men who navigate the social environment most effectively are usually private about their actual operating values. They display only what is strategically useful to display. They do not broadcast leverage points to people who might use them. This is not deception. It is operational discipline. Reason number 5. Your assumption of good faith in others is an operating system flaw. You have been assuming that the people around you generally mean well, that their stated reasons are their actual reasons, that their behavior is best explained by reasonable motivations rather than strategic ones. This assumption is your default. It runs automatically beneath your conscious awareness in every interaction, and it makes you systematically vulnerable to anyone who has discarded the same assumption about you. Schopenhauer wrote about the asymmetry this produces. The good faith man is operating with one set of rules. The strategic man is operating with another. When they interact, the strategic man has access to information the good faith man does not. The recognition that not every motive is what it appears to be. He uses this information to predict, anticipate, and manage the good faith man's responses. The good faith man, operating without this information, is unable to predict, anticipate, or manage in return. You have been on the losing side of this asymmetry your entire adult life. The interactions where someone's stated reasons concealed different actual reasons. The relationships that operated by rules you did not know were in play. The outcomes that consistently favored the people who had abandoned your assumptions about good faith. None of these were random. They were the predictable result of your operating system being more transparent than the systems of the people you were operating against. Machiavelli would not have recommended that you abandon good faith entirely. He would have recommended that you stop assuming it in others. The recognition that good faith is not the universal default produces the strategic clarity that allows you to interact with people on the actual terms they are operating by, rather than the polite terms they are claiming to operate by. Reason number 6. Your need to explain yourself is information you keep providing for free. The man who feels compelled to justify his choices, defend his positions, or explain his reasoning to anyone who questions him is providing continuous data about his internal logic. The operators in his environment Use this data to predict how he will respond to future challenges, where his reasoning is weakest, what arguments will be most effective in moving him, and what framings will produce the least resistance. Machiavelli understood that explanation is not always required. The strong position holds itself without justification. The strong man does not always need to explain why his decision is what it is. His refusal to explain is itself a signal. The signal that his decisions are not subject to negotiation through argument. This signal causes operators to look elsewhere for leverage. The man who explains everything provides leverage continuously. The man who explains selectively provides almost none. You have been explaining yourself far more than was necessary your entire adult life. The justifications offered to people who had no claim on your reasoning. The defensive rationales provided to challenges that did not deserve responses. The continuous output of your internal logic to anyone who showed mild curiosity. Each of these provided people with the operational manual for moving you. They have been referencing the manual ever since. The specific authority that comes from selective explanation is not arrogance. It is the structural recognition that your reasoning is your asset, not the property of anyone who happens to question you. Most men have surrendered this asset through compulsive explanation. The surrender is invisible to them because it feels like communication. It is actually disclosure. Reason number 7. Your visible needs determine what others can withhold from you. When the people around you can identify what you specifically need, emotional connection, validation, opportunity, access, resources, they gain the ability to control the supply. They do not have to deny you. They simply have to manage the timing and conditions of access. The intermittent provision of what you need produces compliance more reliably than constant denial would. You do not even recognize the management because the resource is being supplied, just on terms that maintain the operator's leverage. Schopenhauer observed this dynamic in human relationships generally. The visible need creates the operator. As soon as your need becomes legible to someone with the capacity to address it, the relationship structure shifts. They are the supplier. You are the recipient. The supplier maintains the position by carefully managing the supply. You experience this as a relationship. They experience it as a dynamic with specific levers. Many of the relationships you currently inhabit are operating on this dynamic without your awareness. The friends whose attention is provided on their schedule rather than yours. The romantic partners whose affection is calibrated to maintain your continued investment. The professional relationships where access is controlled by people who know exactly what you are seeking from them. Each of these involves a need you have made visible and someone who has positioned themselves as its primary supplier. The men who navigate this dynamic most effectively reduce the visibility of their needs, not through denial, through privacy. They develop their internal capacity to meet their own requirements before announcing requirements that others could supply. The shift this produces in their relationships is immediate and structural. The operators stop having anything to operate. Reason number 8. Your fear of conflict is a green light for systematic exploitation. The man whose visible reluctance to engage in conflict is well known. has effectively announced that exploiting him will not produce significant resistance. The operators in his environment understand this. They calibrate their requests, demands, and impositions accordingly. They take more than they would attempt to take from a man who would visibly push back. They expect compliance, and the compliance arrives reliably, because the alternative, conflict, is more expensive to the conflict-averse man than whatever specific exploitation is occurring. Machiavelli wrote extensively about the necessity of being willing to produce friction when the alternative is sustained loss. The man who cannot accept the cost of conflict pays the higher cost of the continuous low-level losses that result from his unwillingness to defend himself. The losses do not feel like losses because they are distributed across time. The cumulative effect across years is enormous. The man who avoided conflict to preserve his peace ends up with neither peace nor anything else worth defending. You have been one of these men. The exploitation has been continuous, low-grade, and almost invisible because it was specifically calibrated to remain below the threshold that would have triggered your response. Each individual instance was small enough to absorb. The cumulative effect across your entire adult life has been substantial, and the men who have benefited from it understood your aversion to conflict more clearly than you did. This is one of the most persistent patterns in your life. It will continue operating until you become willing to produce friction at the moments when friction is required to prevent ongoing extraction. Most men never reach this willingness. They prefer the comfortable absorption of small losses to the discomfort of the necessary confrontation. Reason number 9. Your assumption that you are not being manipulated is the manipulation working. This is the final reason. And it is the meta-pattern that protects all the previous 8 from your detection. Because the manipulation that operates effectively produces the specific belief in the target that he is not being manipulated. He goes about his life with the conviction that his choices are his own. His relationships are genuine. His outcomes are the natural product of his decisions. The conviction is required for the operation to continue. As soon as the target begins seriously questioning whether he is being manipulated, the manipulation begins to lose its effectiveness. Machiavelli understood this with brutal clarity. The most successful operations are the ones the target never identifies. The target's continued belief that nothing is happening is the operation's primary defense. This is why operators invest energy in maintaining the target's sense of normalcy. They reassure. They reinforce. They construct narratives that explain away the patterns the target might otherwise notice. All of this is operational maintenance. You are currently maintaining the belief that the previous 8 reasons do not apply to you. You are noting them, considering them briefly, constructing reasons why your specific situation is different, why the people in your life are operating in good faith, why the patterns you are recognizing are coincidental rather than systematic. This construction is itself the operation. The very mechanism that has been shielding the manipulation from your detection your entire adult life. You will continue maintaining the construction. You will return to operating by your usual assumptions. The patterns will continue. The operators will continue. The outcomes that consistently favor them over you will continue. and the manipulation that you are now confident is not happening to you will continue producing exactly the life you are currently leading. The manipulation only fails when the target stops protecting it.